On Maplewood Lane, Emily and Richard Hayes were the couple everyone envied. Their lawn was always trimmed, their front porch blooming with flowers in perfect symmetry. At neighborhood gatherings, Richard's laughter carried above the rest, a polished charm that made him magnetic. Emily, with her quiet grace, stood at his side like the finishing touch to his perfection. To the outside world, they were untouchable. I remember the way neighbors looked at us, admiring, approving. The perfect couple, they said. Richard never missed a handshake, never forgot a name. He carried an air of authority that demanded respect without ever raising his voice. And I played my part, smiling, nodding, agreeing, the elegant wife who adored her husband. But perfection is not truth. It is performance. Inside our home, behind the polished doors, the script shifted. Richard's charm, so effortless in public, turned sharper in private. He never shouted. He didn't need to. Control can live in the smallest of gestures. The pause before he answered, the slight tightening of his jaw, the way his hand lingered on my shoulder just long enough to remind me who held the reins. At dinner one evening, with the clink of silverware between us, he asked, "Why did you laugh so much at Mark's joke tonight?" I glanced up, confused. "It was funny." "Funny," he echoed, his smile polite but his eyes unblinking. "Not that funny, Emily." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words carried a weight that made me swallow my protest. Later, while he slept soundly, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. It was not anger I felt, but the quiet ache of disappearance. Every choice, every thought, every laugh of mine seemed filtered through him. To our neighbors, we were devoted. To me, we were bound. On Sunday mornings, we sat at church pews holding hands like newlyweds. On Tuesday nights, we hosted dinners where Richard charmed guests with stories of success and ambition. Everyone said we were lucky, but no one saw the silence in our home when the guests left, the way my words dwindled to nothing, replaced by the rhythm of his voice filling every corner. Still, I played my role. The world wanted the illusion, and Richard demanded it. One evening, standing before the bathroom mirror, I practiced my smile. I tried to see if the cracks showed. For a moment, I thought I glimpsed them, hairline fractures beneath the gloss. But Richard's voice called from the bedroom, and I smoothed them away. The illusion was intact. For now, but illusions cannot last forever. And the truth, sharp, relentless, was already stirring beneath the surface. Illusions hold under the weight of admiration, but behind the front door, truth waits in silence. For Richard and me, that silence was never empty. It was a cage. He never raised his hand, rarely raised his voice. Instead, his control seeped in like smoke, invisible at first, but choking when breathed too long. He monitored me in ways so subtle they seemed almost loving. "Did you call your mother today?" He would ask casually. "Yes, this afternoon," I'd reply. His brow would furrow. Strange. I didn't hear the phone. It was always like this, doubts disguised as questions, gentle enough to make me wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing. One night at dinner, the crack widened. The roast chicken I'd prepared sat untouched on his plate. "You used too much time," he said, voice calm. "I followed the recipe," I answered. His lips curved into a smile. "Maybe you think you did. Your memory has been off lately." That was how Richard worked, not with violence, but with whispers that rewrote reality. I began to second-guess the smallest details. Had I really added time? Had I really made that call? Or was my mind slipping as he suggested? The silence between us was sharp. In public, we laughed at the same jokes. In private, his corrections hollowed me out. Slowly, I found myself choosing silence over argument, nodding rather than risking doubt. The less I spoke, the more space his words occupied. Our home became a stage where I played the role of the obedient wife. I walked carefully, smiled carefully, spoke carefully. Each movement weighed down by the question, would this please him, or would it be twisted against me? But even prisons built of whispers leave traces of resistance. Sometimes, in the late hours when he had gone to bed, I stood alone in the hallway, staring at the framed photographs of us smiling on vacation. The faces looked genuine, yet I couldn't remember the warmth of those moments, only the instructions he had given. Stand here, smile bigger, put your hand on my chest. I began to realize that our marriage was not a partnership, but a performance directed by him. And I, the actress, was losing the script, Still, I stayed silent. Still, I smiled. But silence, once cracked, spreads like glass under pressure. And soon those cracks would widen into something undeniable, something glowing in the dark of his phone screen. Cracks in silence are dangerous. They widen when curiosity slips through. For weeks, Richard's questions had chipped at my sanity, making me doubt my own memory. But one night, the doubt shifted back to him. He had left his briefcase open in the study. Richard was meticulous, obsessive about order, but exhaustion must have dulled his vigilance. Papers jutted out, and when I passed by, my eyes caught the numbers. Bank statements, hidden accounts, transfers I had never known about, large sums moving quietly, names blurred under layers of business jargon. But one name repeated often enough to lodge itself in my mind: Elena. The air turned heavy in that room. I pressed the papers flat, scanning line after line, the pattern undeniable. Richard's life had always been a map I followed, but here was a trail he never intended me to see. That night, I began listening differently. Richard's late-night phone calls, once dismissed as work, now carried softer tones, murmurs, laughter, a warmth he hadn't shown me in years. One evening, while he showered, I stood in the hallway, his phone glowing in my hand. The call log confirmed it. Elena again and again, sometimes past midnight, sometimes at lunch when he claimed to be too busy. My fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the realization of betrayal. He who scrutinized my smallest actions had been weaving lies with another woman. Every correction, every twist of reality, every whisper that I was losing my mind, it was him projecting his own sins. I wanted to storm into the bathroom, fling the phone against the wall and demand answers. But rage, when it cools, becomes sharper. Instead of confronting him, I slid the phone back, returned the papers, and walked away. Because silence was stronger than shouting. Silence gave me time. That night, as Richard slept beside me, I stared into the dark, my heart no longer racing with doubt, but with clarity. He thought I was blind, pliant, bound to his control. He was wrong. I had found the forbidden trail, and I would not confront him. Not yet. Instead, I would follow it quietly. I would let him lead me deeper into his lies, until he could no longer find the way back out. Discovery changes everything, though Richard never noticed the shift. I carried his betrayal like a stone in my pocket, heavy, hidden, shaping the way I walked beside him. He thought I was still pliant, still the wife molded to his control. But inside, my silence had sharpened into something he could not see. It was during one of his late-night indulgences that the game began. A glass of bourbon in his hand, the flicker of a documentary glowing across the room. Murder, betrayal, trials, the very themes that had infected our lives, though he believed them distant. "You know what's interesting?" he said suddenly, his voice casual. I didn't look up right away. "What?" "These cases always unravel because people act alone. Emotions get messy, mistakes happen. But if a couple did it, if they trusted each other completely, they could pull off the perfect act." He turned to me then, his eyes alive in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Don't you think, Emily, we could do it?" The fury inside me surged, but I masked it with a faint smile. "A perfect act?" I asked, feigning curiosity. "Yes," he said, leaning closer. "Think about it. Everyone believes in us. The devoted husband, the loyal wife. We'd be untouchable." His words dripped with arrogance, each syllable a mockery of the trust he had already shattered. Yet I played my role, nodding slowly, pretending to consider. What he thought was a game of control was, in truth, my opening. "What would it look like?" I asked softly, his face lit with boyish excitement. He launched into theories, carefully timed alibis, discreet methods, the psychology of deception. He spoke with the same charisma he used on Neighbors, only now it was darker, hungrier. I listened, every detail threading into my memory. His fantasies became my evidence, his words my shield. With every idea he voiced, he tied himself tighter to the crime he dreamed of. And still I smiled. "You've thought a lot about this," I whispered. He laughed, mistaking my calm for fascination. "Of course. Together, we'd be unstoppable." Inside, I wanted to scream, to confront him with the truth of Elena and his lies. But revenge is not born in shouting. It is cultivated in patience. I realized then that his obsession with control had blinded him. He thought he was inviting me into his secret. In reality, he was stepping willingly into mine. Later that night, as he drifted into sleep, I lay awake beside him. His words echoed in the darkness. Perfect act, perfect couple, unstoppable. But illusions never last, and the balance of power, so long his, had begun to tilt. The first time Richard pulled out paper and pen, I realized our whispers had crossed a line. What had begun as after-dinner musings now sprawled across the coffee table. Maps of streets, notes in his tight handwriting, arrows connecting times and places like a detective's board. Hypothetically, he said, his voice carrying that polished calm. If she leaves the office at 9, she'd take this route. Dark, quiet, no cameras. His finger traced the path with unsettling ease. I leaned closer, feigning curiosity, though my stomach turned. And if someone saw? That's the beauty, he answered smoothly. They'd never suspect us. A married couple walking together looks harmless. To him it was a thrill, a puzzle to solve. His smile widened when he spoke, as though the betrayal in his heart had transformed into something daring. To me, every detail he shared was ammunition. Each careless word was another thread I could tie around him. Soon napkins at restaurants became scribbled alibis. Grocery lists hid coded times. Our whispers grew darker, laced with a perverse intimacy. Sometimes he laughed, intoxicated by the thought of being cleverer than everyone else. Sometimes his eyes burned with an intensity that chilled me. "Picture it, Emily," he said one night, lowering his voice. "Two people, bound together, flawless in execution. Crime without cracks," I smiled faintly. "And you think we're flawless?" "Of course." He kissed my hand as if his faith in us was unshakable. But I knew better. Flaws had already bloomed like rot beneath the surface of our marriage, and I would use them. At night, when he finally slept, I studied the notes he left scattered. His handwriting, his diagrams, his imagined alibis. To him they were play. To me they were evidence. Pieces I could plant, fragments I could twist. The deeper he went into fantasy, the clearer my own reality became. This was no longer just about Elena. No longer just about his lies. It was about freedom. About turning his obsession with control into the very thing that destroyed him. One night, as I folded the papers neatly back into the drawer, I caught my reflection in the glass of the cabinet. My smile was small, deliberate. For the first time in years, I didn't look like the obedient wife he believed me to be. I looked like someone planning something far more dangerous. And soon, I would push him past the safety of fantasy into reality. Plans are safe when they live on paper. Ink cannot bleed, maps cannot scream, schedules cannot beg for mercy. But I knew Richard's thrill came only because the plans were still abstract. To test him, I had to nudge fantasy closer to reality. It was a rainy evening when I made my move. Richard sat hunched at the kitchen table, notes spread like a general preparing for battle. His excitement glittered, though his hands trembled just enough to betray him. "You've thought this through," I said lightly, leaning against the counter. "Of course," he replied, puffing his chest. "No detail escapes me." I let a pause settle before speaking. "Then why stop at planning? Why not see if it works?" His pen froze. Slowly he looked up, confusion clouding his features. "What do you mean?" I walked toward him, deliberate. "Elena leaves work at 9, doesn't she? You've said it a dozen times. Let's follow her just once, no risk. Just to test if your theories hold." Silence swelled. The rain outside drummed against the windows, matching the quickening beat of his pulse. For the first time, his confidence faltered. "Emily," he said, forcing a laugh. "It's just a game. I didn't mean, didn't you?" I cut in softly. "Or are you afraid?" The word lingered, sharp as glass. His jaw clenched, pride warring with fear. He had built his identity on control, on being the one who never faltered. To admit hesitation now would mean admitting weakness. Finally, he muttered, "Fine, we'll follow her." I smiled faintly, hiding the surge of victory inside me. He thought he was proving strength, but all I saw was fracture. His bravado had cracked, revealing the man beneath, smaller, weaker, terrified of his own imagination. That night, while he scribbled nervous notes, I watched in silence. He didn't realize the shift, but I did. The game was no longer his. The reins had slid into my hands, and soon, when the knock came on our door, the first intrusion into our perfect illusion, it would be his fear, not mine, that answered it. The night Richard agreed to follow Elena, his mask cracked, But cracks don't heal. They spread. And when the knock came days later, heavy and deliberate, the fracture widened. I was in the kitchen, rinsing dishes, when Richard opened the door. His voice faltered. "Detective?" A tall man stepped inside, broad-shouldered, with steady eyes that surveyed the house as though he had already mapped it. His badge gleamed faintly under the porch light. "Detective Harper," he said. "I'm following up on a missing persons report, Elena Walsh. May I ask you a few questions?" The name cut the air like a blade. Richard stiffened, his hand tightening on the doorframe. For the first time in years, his composure betrayed him. "Of course," he muttered, forcing a smile. "Come in." I dried my hands slowly, joining them in the living room. Harper's gaze met mine, sharp, assessing, but his tone remained courteous. "Mrs. Hayes, thank you for your time." Richard sank into a chair, sweat beading at his temples. "This is unexpected." "Elena, you say?" "She worked at the firm." "Yes," Harper replied, flipping open a small notebook. "She was last seen leaving the office late Friday. Mr. Hayes, witnesses say you were one of the last to speak with her." Richard's throat bobbed. "Just work matters. Nothing important." His words cracked under the weight of the silence that followed. Harper's eyes shifted to me. "And you, Mrs. Hayes? Did you know her?" I folded my hands neatly in my lap, voice steady. "Not personally. Richard mentioned her from time to time. I assumed she was just a colleague." Harper's pen scratched against paper. He studied me longer than necessary, as though weighing truth against performance. But I let the calm wash over me, my expression one of polite confusion, touched with just enough concern. Richard, meanwhile, fidgeted with his cufflinks, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. Every gesture betrayed him more than words could. Harper closed his notebook. "Thank you. I'll be in touch if I need anything further." He left as quickly as he came, the front door clicking shut behind him. Silence rushed back into the room, heavy and suffocating. Richard collapsed into the armchair, his voice a hoarse whisper. "He suspects me." I stood in the doorway, watching him unravel. "Then you'd better make sure he doesn't find a reason to." He buried his face in his hands. But I simply turned away, a calm smile hidden from him. The first intrusion had arrived, and it was only the beginning. After Detective Harper's visit, Richard's mask crumbled. The polished husband neighbors adored was gone, replaced by a man gnawed by guilt and paranoia. At night, I woke to find him pacing the hallway, muttering fragments under his breath. Sometimes he pressed his palms against the walls, as if the house itself were closing in. Other times he stood at the window, staring at the empty street as though Harper lurked just beyond the shadows. "Emily," he whispered one night, his voice ragged. "You didn't do anything, did you? With Elena?" I turned slowly, letting silence stretch before answering. "Do anything?" He swallowed hard. "Without me. You didn't go further than the plan?" I let a soft, humorless smile touch my lips. "Why would you ask me that?" He recoiled at my calm, suspicion gnawing deeper. His doubt made him restless, snapping at small things. My tone, my silences, the way I set the table. Every action seemed like proof to him that I was hiding something. Meals went untouched. His hair grew disheveled, his once crisp suits hanging looser on his frame. At work, his colleagues called me with concern, saying he seemed distracted, unstable. I told them he was tired, but tiredness was not the word. Richard was unraveling. One evening, he grabbed my wrist, his eyes wild. "Tell me the truth, Emily. Did you set me up?" His grip trembled more than it tightened, desperation outweighing strength. I pulled free gently, my voice even. "You've already set yourself up," his breath hitched. For a moment, he looked at me not as wife or partner, but as something far more dangerous. He no longer knew where the lies ended and the truth began. The silence between us became a battlefield. Each pause was a weapon, each glance a blade. Words no longer soothed him. They only deepened his fear. And I, standing calm in the storm of his panic, began to see the scales tip fully in my favor. Richard had always believed control belonged to him. Now he was a man consumed by suspicion, hollowed out by guilt. And soon, when the confrontation finally came, it would not be mine to lose. The storm outside raged as if it had been summoned for this moment. Rain lashed the windows, thunder rolling like judgment. Inside, the house felt smaller than ever, the silence thick with suspicion. Richard paced the living room, hair damp from nervous sweat, eyes darting toward me as though I were both wife and stranger. "You're hiding something," he snapped. His voice was brittle, cracking under its own weight. I remained seated, my hands folded neatly in my lap. "What would I be hiding, Richard?" He stopped pacing, his chest heaving. "Elena, the detective. The plans. You've done something behind my back." His finger trembled as it pointed at me. "You wanted me to fall." For a long moment I said nothing. Let the storm speak for me. Lightning flashed, painting his face in jagged white. He looked like a man cornered prey rather than predator. Finally, I rose slowly. "You want the truth?" My voice was calm, deliberate. "Here it is, yes, Richard. I wanted you to fall. And you've done it beautifully." His eyes widened. What are you saying?" I stepped closer, my words sharp but measured. "You thought you were the mastermind, that I was your loyal accomplice. But it was never your game. It was mine. Every whisper, every plan, every fantasy you believed was yours. I fed them to you. You wrote your own confession without even realizing." He shook his head violently, backing away. No, that's not, isn't it?" I cut in. "Who sketched the maps? Who spoke of alibis? Who obsessed over her routine?" "You." I simply smiled and agreed. And now when Harper looks at us, who does he see? A husband with motive, with secrets, with obsession? Richard collapsed into the armchair, clutching his head. "You twisted everything." I leaned down, close enough to feel his uneven breath. "I didn't twist anything. I simply let you reveal yourself. Elena was your sin. The paranoia was your weakness. I only gave it the space to grow." He stared at me then, horror dawning in his eyes. For the first time, he saw me not as the obedient wife, not as his shadow, but as the architect of his ruin. "You set me up," he whispered. I smiled faintly. "No, Richard. You set yourself up. I just opened the door and watched you walk through it." Thunder shook the house, rattling the glass. His sobs broke through the storm, raw and hollow. I straightened, my calm unbroken, the final words falling like a verdict. "You wanted the perfect crime. Congratulations. You've become it." As lightning flared once more, the image of him crumbling in that chair seared into my memory. The man who once controlled every thread of my life was now a puppet tangled in his own strings. And soon, the world would see him exactly as I had crafted. Guilty. The night of confession ended with silence that clung like smoke. But silence never lasts. By morning, flashing lights shattered the calm. Police cars lined the driveway, their beams painting the walls in red and blue. Richard barely had time to rise from his chair before the handcuffs snapped shut. He looked at me as they dragged him away, eyes wide, mouth trembling with disbelief. He didn't fight. He couldn't. The courtroom became our new stage. Reporters swarmed the steps. Neighbors whispered in pew-like rows, and the gallery filled with curious strangers eager to see how the story of the perfect couple had unraveled. Richard sat at the defense table, his once-tailored suits now hanging loose on his frame. His face was pale, drawn, hollowed out by sleepless nights. I took the stand opposite him, my voice measured, my tears placed like careful brushstrokes on a canvas. He forced me," I said, clutching a handkerchief. At first I thought it was just stories, just his way of coping with stress. But then he began controlling me, coercing me to play along. I was terrified. The jury leaned closer. Every detail I gave, his late-night whispers, his obsession with Elena, the maps and schedules, fit neatly into the puzzle of a man spiraling into madness. What they didn't see was how carefully I'd guided his hand in drawing that picture. The prosecutor seized the narrative. "Mrs. Hayes, did you ever believe your husband would act on these fantasies?" I let my voice break just enough. I didn't want to believe it. But he spoke of her constantly. He planned everything. I was too afraid to stop him. Across the room, Richard slammed his fist against the table. "She's lying. She planned this. She planted everything." His voice cracked, desperate, unhinged. The jury recoiled, their eyes hardening against him. His outburst was my greatest gift, proof of the instability I had described. The vows we had once exchanged twisted into weapons in that room. For better or worse became evidence of my endurance under his supposed tyranny. Till death do us part became the prosecutor's motive. Jealousy, obsession, betrayal. Love transformed into a chain he had wrapped around Elena. then me. Day after day, the trial played out like a macabre theater. Reporters wrote of the devoted wife who survived. Commentators praised my composure. Every whisper of suspicion about me drowned beneath Richard's rage. And when the verdict came, guilty, the room fell into a hush. Richard's shoulders collapsed, his head bowing under the weight of the gavel. As they led him away, he turned one last time, his voice a broken whisper. "You did this." I met his eyes, calm and steady. "No, Richard. You did this to yourself." The cameras caught the tear that slid down my cheek, the fragile mask of sorrow. They didn't see the faint curl of triumph hiding beneath it. The trial was over, and I had won. The trial ended, but the story lingered in whispers. Neighbors crossed the street to embrace me, their voices filled with pity and admiration. To them, I was the woman who had endured the unimaginable, a wife betrayed, coerced, and finally freed. "Stay strong, Emily," Mrs. Porter murmured, pressing a casserole into my hands. "You are an inspiration to us all." I smiled, lowering my eyes in practiced humility. They called me the brave widow, even though Richard still lived, his life reduced to prison walls. To the world, he was already gone, consumed by guilt and madness. And I, left behind, had become a symbol of survival. The newspapers adored me. Articles praised my composure, my testimony, the quiet dignity with which I carried myself through the storm. Television anchors replayed clips of me on the stand, tears glistening just enough to break hearts. They didn't know those tears had been rehearsed in the mirror, long before the trial began. Inside the house, silence once again ruled. But it was a different silence, no longer suffocating, no longer filled with Richard's watchful gaze. This silence was mine. It hummed with freedom, with victory. At night I sat in the armchair where Richard once crumbled, the faint glow of a lamp washing the room in gold. I replayed the trial in my mind, the gasps of the gallery, the jury's verdict, the moment Richard's face broke under the weight of betrayal. Each memory warmed me like a fire. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the window. My smile startled me, not the polite curve I showed to neighbors, not the fragile tremor for reporters, but something raw, unguarded. It was the smile of someone who had not only survived but conquered. They thought I had endured Richard's darkness. The truth was far more dangerous. I had mastered it. Still, the story was not finished. Detective Harper's eyes had lingered too long during the trial, his silence too heavy. He had left with questions unspoken, doubts unvoiced. But for now, the world believed in my innocence. And in that belief I thrived. The neighbors' sympathy still lingered on my doorstep, their casseroles stacked neatly in the kitchen, their praises echoing in my ears. To them, I was a story of survival. To me, I was its author, but not every reader had been fooled. Detective Harper remained. His visits had grown less frequent, but his gaze never softened. Even in the courtroom, while the jury wept for me, his eyes had searched for cracks. Weeks after the verdict, he returned, not with polite questions, but with a warrant. Officers combed through the house with deliberate precision, opening drawers, peeling back layers of the life I'd curated. I stood calmly in the living room, arms folded, the very picture of patience. It was Harper who found it. In the study, tucked beneath a false bottom of the desk drawer, he unearthed the journals. Leather-bound, their edges worn by years of secrets. He placed them on the table with a reverence reserved for relics. Then he opened them. Page after page bared my thoughts. The day I discovered Elena, the choice to remain silent, the whispers I planted in Richard's ear, the satisfaction of watching paranoia devour him. I had written it all, not as confession, but as record. Richard believes he holds control. He doesn't realize the plan is mine. Gaslighting works both ways. I only need to be patient. When the time comes, the world will see him as I've crafted. Guilty. Harper's brow furrowed deeper with each line. He turned the final page, and there it was, my closing words, deliberate and cold. The thrill isn't in the crime. It isn't in blood or silence or justice. The thrill is in surviving it. And I have survived. When he looked up, our eyes locked. His expression was unreadable, but I sensed the storm beneath. "Why keep this?" he asked quietly. I smiled faintly. "Because every story needs an ending, even if no one believes it. Behind him, officers whispered, unsure if the journals were proof or madness. No bodies tied to me. No fingerprints linking me to Elena's disappearance, only words. Words could condemn, but they could also be dismissed as grief, trauma, or invention. Harper closed the book slowly, his gaze still fixed on mine. You're clever, Mrs. Hayes. Too clever to have left this by accident. Or perhaps, I replied softly, I wanted someone to read it. Stories don't matter if they stay hidden. He lingered at the doorway, his voice low, measured. This isn't over, but it was. At least for now. When the house emptied again, silence wrapped around me once more. I sat in my chair, looking at the journals lined neatly before me. My reflection in the window smiled back, a survivor, an author, a victor. And whether the world chose to believe me or not, the truth was undeniable. I had written the story, and I had won.